Good morning, Mosaic. Happy Sunday, January 16th, 2020. I'm Reverend Ben Collins. Thanks again to Judy, our leader, for introducing me. Judy, we've been doing the good work a long time now. You've seen me grow up in some embarrassing ways and some funny ways, but I'm glad to be with you guys. It's a new year. I'm with you this week and then back again in a couple weeks to complete today's thought, actually. What I want to say in a number of ways is that any new beginning is also an ending. If you've studied any sort of transition or transitional leadership, beginnings are endings, endings are new beginnings. Or to say that to walk into a new year, to walk forward, we have to leave something behind. Everyone else gets to take a step as well, and they're not all walking in the same direction that you are or that I am. And that's okay. That's the thought today. And then in 2 weeks, what we're going to say is, but once you know where you're going, you get all sorts of community. You get all sorts of kinship along the way from those who are walking in the same direction. So this week, walk away, and then in a couple weeks, walking together. I hope that makes sense. So let's start with some context. This is a reading from the prophet Micah in the Hebrew Bible. This is Micah chapter 7. What misery is mine? I am like one who gathers summer fruit at the gleaning of the vineyard. There is no cluster of grapes to eat, none of the early figs that I crave. The faithful have been swept from the land. Not one upright person remains. Everyone lies in wait to shed blood. They hunt each other with nets. Both hands are skilled in doing evil. The ruler demands gifts. The judge accepts bribes. The powerful dictate what they desire. They all conspire together. The best of them is like a briar, the most upright, worse than a thorn hedge. The day God visits you has come. The day of your watchmen. Sound the alarm. Now is the time of your confusion. Do not trust a neighbor. Put no confidence in a friend, even with the woman who lies in your embrace. Guard the words of your lips. For a son dishonors his father. A daughter rises up against her mother. A daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the members of his own household. And a happy new year. One commentary about Micah 7 says the literary form of this chapter is a lament in which Micah weeps over the sad state of affairs into which his nation has fallen by its sin. I go, man, the Bible is just so irrelevant, right? So outdated. And I want to open with this question. What does it mean for you now on the leading edge of 2022? What makes you weep? Let's just take the framework of Micah's rant. What makes you weep? What is the sad state of affairs? And what is the nation's sin? What makes you weep? What's the sad state of affairs? And what's the nation's sin? And I'll give you a hint. That's part of what we want to walk away from, right? That's part of what we're leaving. All right, let me give a little bit more texture to this. This is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10. This is Jesus, by the way. I'm sure you've heard of him. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but to bring a sword. For I have come to turn, or another translation, to divide, a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. And that's a direct quotation from what we just heard in Micah. He goes on. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Now may the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts grant us not only the light of wisdom to understand these words, but the fire of conviction to put them into practice. Amen. Okay, so whatever you believe about Jesus, God, Christianity, and that's, I get it, that's my tradition. That tends to be my diving board, but I promise I'm going to land in the Unitarian pool. So whatever you believe about God, Jesus, Christianity, just at a surface level here, it does seem like Jesus is kind of saying, who's with me? Right? Who's with me? Or even more directly, choose me. Choose this path, choose this way, choose this sacrifice, choose this life. And choose to lose this life, and then you're going to find a life we're not exactly sure what, but Jesus is like, trust me, let's do this. So it's decision time. It's decision time. And I came up Baptist. So it's decision time, not in the sense of every head bowed and every eye closed, and raise your hand if you've prayed the sinner's prayer, and you want to get born again. I see that hand in the back. Just come on down front. Get slain in the Spirit. We'll baptize you in the St. John's. And look, that sounds fun. Don't get me wrong. That's sort of nostalgia-y. But what Jesus is talking about is not nearly that easy. You don't just get to come down the aisle and go get dunked in the water. He's saying this is decision time. Like, your family is not going to like this very much. Your friend group might not get this one. Mama said there'd be days like this, and guess what, Mama? They're here. Your dad, he's going to be disappointed. It's going to kill your auntie. But this is me. This is who I am, and I have to be my true self. We forget sometimes that Jesus' path to peace, right? We celebrated a couple of weeks ago, Christmas Eve, the birth of the Prince of Peace. We forget that Jesus' path to peace was carved through the middle of the Roman Empire, and that he was a perceived threat intentionally, with propaganda, a perceived threat to the demigod Caesar. And the contrast couldn't have been more clear between Jesus' audience and Caesar's audience. Caesar was this power-hungry, petulant, entitled son of privilege and violence and empire. And so Jesus sets up his intention to divide his audience. Jesus or Caesar, the old broken way or a new promising way. And he sets the context using the reference to Micah 7, right? Jesus is sort of winking at his hearers that this has also become a time where people are weeping at the sad state of affairs over their nation's sin. The corruption of the nation was at a fever pitch. Israel was in collusion with the Roman Empire. I mean, like, imagine a president violently clearing a churchyard for this awkward Bible photo op. And Israel's sin here isn't that Brad looked at porn, or Susie cursed under her breath, or Jade cheated on the exam, or Mordecai botched the pigeon sacrifice, or Gamaliel spilled the ram's blood on the temple steps. The sin of the nation is what leads to the sad state of affairs. Violence, injustice, oppression, systemic financial and economic abuse, coercion, racism, xenophobia. I mean, does this sound familiar at all? Are we talking about the Bible, or are we talking about the January 6th investigation? So first, Jesus is a practitioner of nonviolent resistance. We want to pause and say this before we go any further, because we're talking about swords and peace. Jesus is a practitioner of nonviolent resistance. And so this sword is a symbol. The sword is a metaphor. Even this form of literature that Jesus is sort of embodying or performing, we could say speaking, this is from his tradition, is called apocalyptic. And it's a form meant to reveal or shed light on something like a deeply broken state of affairs. It speaks truth to power, but the genre is saturated in hyperbole. So it often feels very mythic, magical, violent. And so here Jesus uses the language, but his sword doesn't shed blood. It divides an audience. Okay, so when we talk about what we're walking away from, we're sort of using Jesus here dividing an audience to talk about what it is that we walk away from. His sword isn't shedding blood. He's not doing violence. He's dividing his audience. Those are there for those who are there for what he's doing, and then those who are not. His sword, we could say his sword doesn't keep the peace. His sword divides the audience into those who will resist change to keep power. That's the empire. That's the religious system. And those who will join him in making peace by changing things, challenging the powers that be, practicing a new kind of consciousness. And so this is intentionally provocative, hyperbolic language aimed to get attention. It's extreme so that you'll look at it. And I think if I could summarize, he's saying like, and this will feel familiar to you today, things are in a bad way all around us. Some of us have consensus about a way that we could feel more loved and be more loving in the world. We think this is the way forward. But expect folks not to agree with you or come along. The best response to this resistance is to come along anyway. To get this new life that we're dreaming of, we have to not keep the old life just the way it is. I mean, that makes sense. And I think he's saying right now, at this point in the movement, right now, it's not about bringing everyone along. It's not about managing perception. Right now, the question is really just who's with us. Who's with us? And how do we know who's with us except to say who we are? And part of the work of a community like Mosaic, and this is a good time of year to do it, is that we're always sort of dividing an audience by coming to know more clearly who we are. Who are we? What do we stand for? Because the more we know who we are, the more we also know who we're not, right? So we go, who's with us? But we also go, we're not doing everything. We're doing this set of things. So let me give you some examples that I think probably we agree on. Our congregation has been working through some of this stuff moving into the new year, so they're sort of fresh in my mind. And as we move into not just a new year, but a new season, what are some of the watershed points of identity that are so significant that people would decide to stay or go around these things? Because at the end of the day, we can't do everything, right? You can't be Unitarian and Christian. You can't be progressive and conservative. You can't be LGBTQ affirming and homophobic. You can't do everything. You can't be everything. So we might say something, for example, like we're very theologically open and socially progressive. I think it's fair to say Mosaic is that. And the point is, if you're not theologically open and socially progressive, you're not bad. We're not judging anyone. This is not a value judgment. We're acknowledging that you're probably not coming with us where we're headed, because we celebrate queer inclusion and leadership and gifts and witness. And if you don't, you're not bad, but you're probably not coming with us. And that's what we're saying. This is who we are, who's coming with us. We don't think homosexuality is a problem, but a lot of times theology around homosexuality is a problem. You know, who's with us? Sexuality, human sexuality, relationships are messy. If you can talk about that stuff in connection with spirituality, you're probably with us. If you like to critique religious stories that do harm, like hell, stories that are used to manipulate and scare, you're probably with us. If you think that spiritual practices and community could be a great supplement and partner to your mental health journey, you're probably with us. If you think Black Lives Matter in spiritual community, you're probably with us. If you think loving your neighbor and your enemy with masks and vaccines is the right thing to do, you're probably with us. If you think God, guns, and Christian nationalism is just tired and toxic and idolatrous, you're probably with us. I mean, can you, the point is, and you could go on, the list goes on and on. Can you imagine any one of these topics or subjects or contentious arguments being the kind of thing that would divide a father and a child, a mother and a child, a husband from a wife, a sister-in-law from a brother-in-law? And at the same time, we'll talk about this next week, we'll create an opportunity to authentically unite that audience that is with us, right? Because there will be people who go, wait a minute, no, Black lives do matter, and that's a spiritual conviction. That's something our community ought to hold and act on. The inclusion of all people with dignity, that's a conviction that we should all act on. And so as soon as Jesus says, like, for example, as soon as he says, you've got to love me more than your parents, and you sort of hear it, like, and your parents aren't even sure that Black lives matter, right? What's he done to these punk rock teenage fishermen? He's divided them from their parents and united them to this movement, right? He's not stupid. Once we know who's with us, we can unite around the work that is ours to do together. And that's the question for you all. We're just a couple weeks into the year, Mosaic. What are the few things that are yours to do? What are the things that are yours to do? What are the essential few, so that you don't get lost in the weeds of the trivial many? Because there's lots of work to do, and a lot of that work to do is good work. But what is yours to do this year? Let's divide and galvanize our audience around that, around who you are and what the work is that's yours to do. And this is a good time of year, right, to clarify who we are so that we can ask who's with us. And then we do it. We go do the work of making good lives as good people. And that means we can't leave every possibility open, right? We have to do something. We have to do one thing. And this is, I'm going to try to describe this. It's complex, but I think you all will understand this. This is sort of the failure, somewhat of the stage of consciousness that we're at. Mosaic as a congregation, our congregation, is that we got to this point where we moved out of a monolithic stage of consciousness where there was only one story, right? And for most of us, it was Christianity, it was tradition, it was the American dream, So there's one story. And then we had this major shift in consciousness during the civil rights era, and we started going, oh my God, there's a story of minority populations, there's a women's story, there's a queer story, there's all these other stories. And then some of us who were just, our consciousness was exploding, we got liberal education and higher education, and we started going, oh my God, there's all these other stories. And all these other stories are so valuable and they're so beautiful, and let's get everyone together. And this is Unitarianism, this is Mosaic, is that there's beauty and there's truth and there's goodness in every story. Let's get them together. Let's celebrate. We'll find areas of agreement. We'll do interfaith dialogue. And there's an edge of this stage of consciousness at which it starts to be, what's the phrase? It ceases to be valuable because it's being held so openly. A great example of this is Occupy Wall Street, right? We had all these convictions about anti-hierarchy, and all of the positions were great, the convictions were great, the critiques were great, but they were so anti-hierarchy that with all their great values about telling every story and everyone being equal, they couldn't do anything with it. And so they camped out and they fizzled out. Nothing ever came of it. And this is the same now with cancel culture. It gets to the point where if everything matters, nothing matters. And now it has almost gotten to the point in our society where holding anything like a conviction has almost become an act of violence. And part of what I'm saying is it's okay to be who we are, and it's okay for people to walk away. Because to be clear about a spiritual community and our values, about racism and human sexuality, about destructive theology and regressive morality, or to choose to tell positive stories about death and mental health, to critique nationalism and capitalism, these things will clarify our identity as a community. They'll divide our audience, and that's okay, right? Because Mosaic, you're not an evangelical church. We can't be everything to everyone. We can't do everything. We can do what we can do, and we can be what we can be. The best thing that we can do is be our truest self and let that identity be the watershed that divides our audience, clarifying those who are with us enthusiastically. That's who we're looking for. Who's with us enthusiastically? And then from that group, we can unite a movement around our center of gravity and our values. That's what we'll talk about the next time I'm with you in a couple weeks. But dividing an audience has a cost, right? It's easy to motivate you to do it because we feel good. And it's sexy to feel right. You know, Black lives do matter. Caring for our neighbor does matter. Queer inclusion is the right thing. It feels good to be right, to be on the right side of history. But dividing an audience also has a cost, right? Because we absorb that cost. We absorb that loss. We absorb that pain in our body in the same way that we would if a father walked away, if a mother walked away, right? Not flippantly, not easily. No. To do one thing rather than all the others is a loss. That's a sacrifice. To choose to be a part of something bigger is the sacrifice of something smaller. And guys, let's be honest, sometimes something smaller feels good. It feels safe. It feels familiar. It feels like it doesn't risk. There's a real cost. And at the same time, I think Jesus is onto this. I think the world's traditions are onto this. there's a moment, and it's not until you see. It's not until you see. It's not until you wake up. It's not until you see and experience yourself as a part of something bigger than yourself. That deep sense of being with a movement, right? Who's with us? Are you a part of this? And I think it's sometimes that revelation allows you to finally see how desperate you were for so much less. How desperate you were for so much less. And we tend to think of these kinds of open spiritual communities, these values-based, conviction-based, open spiritual communities as open tables. I think of our congregation as one. I think of Mosaic as one. And that these open tables are safe places to experience this loss and this new life. It's always both, right? That's how the world works. That's evolution. That's death and resurrection. We have to die to the approval of mom and dad and kids. We have to lose the illusion that we can do everything and be everything to everybody. And this is me. I mean, this is what I've been trying to do, guys, for the last 20 years. I've believed this lie. I've burned myself out more times than I can count. I've lived under this illusion. Judy will laugh at this. She knows it's true. We have to lose this illusion that we can do everything and be everything to everybody. That, and this is me, that with the right language, with enough generous theology, that with enough authentic conversations, enough interfaith dialogues, enough symposiums on civil discourse, that with enough of the right tools and people and attitude, we could bring everyone along. Right? If we just had enough of the right books and the language and the discussion groups and we could bring everybody along. Maybe, I doubt it. Honestly, I've been trying 20 years and I haven't been able to. Either way, what I've learned is that you can't try to do all those things and still be a whole person. You can't. You can't be a real self with longings and callings and gifts and power and something to do to contribute to this world and this movement. We got to die to something smaller in order to open ourselves to something bigger. We have to divide an audience between all these other amazing things that we might do and this one thing that we're doing. Oh, this is a tough question. Who's with us in the sacrifice that it takes to be with us? Are we with us? Are we with us? I'll wrap it up here. I swear I'm going to make some friends. Or maybe I'm going to divide my audience right here. I swear, I finished this sermon. I hit play on the season finale of season 1 of Yellowstone. So there, I just divide my audience between those who love Yellowstone and those who probably either don't care or they don't know what it is. It's a great show starring Kevin Costner. Highly recommend it. So the last few minutes of the episode is dialogue. 2 people sitting at this huge empty table. And father and daughter. The father says, "I remember when this table was full." And the daughter says, "No, you don't. That's not a memory. That's a dream." And some time passes and he says, "What you don't realize is that it doesn't matter how many people are at the table. It matters that there's a place for them to sit. The table is all that matters." There's another long pause and she says, "I'm not doing this for the table. I'm doing this for you." Oh, it's so good. This so perfectly captures the tension between the need for the movement and the centrality of the people. We need a movement to make a place for people, and we need people to be the movement. Our deepest allegiance is to one another. And the table reminds us of this, right? Our deepest allegiance is to the people, and we need these communities to remind us of this every week. We desperately need you to be with us, and we desperately need Mosaic to gather us. We're walking into a brave new year. We're walking away from all the things that aren't who we are and all the things that aren't what we're doing. I can't wait to see you in a couple weeks, Mosaic. We'll take the next step. We'll unite a movement. Grace to you and peace. Happy Sunday. Amen.